The energy issue is key, too, as well, because, see, here's what's going on, and this is why we're going into an ice age. There's actually multiple different reasons we're going into an ice age. One of them has to do with Saturn and Jupiter usually are opposite each other in their relative orbits, so they're opposite Earth all the time. Now they're shading together a little bit closer to each other in this 420-year cycle, and so in so doing, they pull our orbit slightly out of circular pattern, and thus we're further away from the sun, thus we're going to lose a little bit of irradiation, and thus we're going into a cooling period. Now, on top of that, something really interesting is happening with the sun. The sun itself is weakening. It's going from 5,000 plus degrees Kelvin, seems to be heading down to what they call the base operating temperature for suns, which is about 3,000 degrees Kelvin. Now, in doing so, it's not a nuclear reactor. The sun is not consuming vast levels of hydrogen in a nuclear fusion or any of that. We don't know what the sun is composed of. We have no idea. It may be a solid surface. It's quite cold. And what happens is it's going through interstellar space, which is not a vacuum. And in the process of that, this flow comes around it. That flow is what causes the light and the heat and everything we see off of the sun in the form of basically a very large electrical plasma. Now, in, let's say, normal times of the previous few centuries, previous few millennia, the sun's light and its arc, the plasma and everything around there, was very robust and very brilliant. And we were in a yellow, in fact, if we go back far enough, even a staggeringly yellow sun. And so when that was going on, that plasma arc actually alters the energies that are flowing around the sun. And so when they flow around the sun, like you go and you see these movies of airplanes, they stick in those little wind tunnels and they put smoke around it so they can see the air flowing around the wing surface. That's very much what we're looking at here with the flow around the sun. But as the sun weakens and the plasma is no longer so strong, much more of that energy comes into us. This causes such things as cosmic rays to come in greater quantity, but also all of these unknown energies that, as you note, are affecting humans. First, you have to understand that Russian is a very interesting language, but there's these issues relating to what are called the verbs of motion. Those verbs of motion in English and other languages are some of our key level words. And so I'm very careful with my Russian in our work because I can so easily get it wrong. So I'm very hesitant about that usually. But also, I haven't had time to put a lot of stuff from Russia in there simply because of the ongoing battles between Faction A and Faction B. And that's likely to continue for some time within our data sets because we're still embroiled in that. Nothing is 100% settled at the moment. There's been a major victory by Faction B. They're doing some consolidation in the United States in terms of their power, but it's still ongoing in Europe and throughout other parts of the planet, including India. So I suspect we'll be in that state for some time of so much information I just can't get it all out. There's links in that data set to China. And so a friend of mine in China who's really savvy to what's going on there said, oh, look, it's probably this. And the Chinese have developed this way of sticking pipes way deep into the ocean and basically making a giant heat pump instead of making heat. It takes electricity and has a further benefit of bringing up extremely cold water for aquaculture. You've got to watch out for the mega hydrate. There's a couple of people that are putting out various products to cause this to occur. Some of them can have deleterious effects on you. The idea of mega hydrate is to make your blood slippery so that the platelets don't clump together, and it has to do with how much water you're ingesting. The idea is that in a chemtrail environment with the aluminum, barium, cesium, and all these other chemicals up there being put down, that it's actually making us dehydrated continuously. That our diet doesn't help, the electromagnetic radiation we're in doesn't help, and so on. And so you need to compensate. And I agree with the idea of compensating, but I go through the structured water rather than through the chemical approach. But the Ayurveda is Ayur meaning life, and Veda meaning truth or truth about life. It's a Hindu form of medicine, or it's a form of medicine that originated in the area between the Himalayan mountains and the Indian Ocean, which we call the Hind or Hindu now. And this is at least 6,000 years old. It is evidence-based medicine, so it's not a theory, and then we try and make a projection off that theory and see if we can prove it and create a drug to deal with it. This is stuff that's been working for 6,000 or 7,000 years. Now, here's the interesting woo-woo part of this. Some of our information coming out of Antarctica is suggesting that the knowledge coming out of there is going to make humans re-examine our relationship with our entire view of, let's call it the healthcare industry over these next few years, and in fact, a very short period of time. So in total, the data sets are suggesting that from now through to 2022, there will be as many changes insofar as the impact on us personally as we've seen maybe in the last 150 years. It'll be coming out that rapidly. I know that this is the case now, that indeed these projections being made by the data that I'm getting and interpreting out of the data are going to be accurate because I'm able to see stuff in reality, such as the advent of the quantum computers and a number of different items that are being pushed into our social order at the fringe, which would be the industrial side of things. So in other words, recently in the past, say, 4 or 5 months, I've done some investigation and have found about half a dozen really interesting devices that are coming into creation now at with no fanfare, and they should be touted, and everybody should just be paying attention to them. And I think what's going on is that they're being introduced into society the same way the transistor was introduced after the 1947 crash in Roswell. Or one of the devices allows you to custom create the little tiny plastic, I guess you'd call it wire or thread that they put through 3D printers. Okay, so imagine being able to control the formulation at a molecular level and decide that within this particular plastic thread for this particular length of time, you wanted this particular metal because it allowed transmission of electricity at this particular level. It would allow you to 3D fabricate complex electrically carrying devices as easily as you would 3D print a small doll. Let's talk about Catherine Austin Fitts here for a moment, okay? She's this person that was worked under Senior George Bush in that administration. She was Assistant Secretary of Housing for the United States, ran one of the largest organizations within the U.S. federal government, knows money inside and out, had the federal government try and kill her repeatedly. She was an enemy of the state because she spoke the truth, and she's a good being all the way around, and she's got some really smart. She's got some observations here that are pertinent. One of these observations is that what we're actually looking at is the battle between two factions. Faction A wanted to keep empire and sacrifice the United States. Faction B is willing to sacrifice empire in order to keep the United States, and they won. Now, Faction B also represents those people that want to push out distributed technology. These people, I think, are reacting to the Ice Age meme that's coming to us, and they're getting away from centralization. So the very point of this technology is that it doesn't go to just big corporations, and that pretty soon anybody will have it. So, for instance, I know that I could go right now in my little tiny town here and purchase a 3D printer, and I can start fabricating right off. I know all kinds of people that are doing the 3D printing stuff, and I also know that it's open source, and so it's growing through this combinoric grassroots kind of an effort where I do something cool, you riff off of my coolness and invent your own, I get back and I take your idea and fold it into something else and so on, and it just grows. And that's what we're after now. That's what I think the ultimate deep state faction B is after, is that combinoric influence that you don't get with corporations. What they're after is what gives Bitcoin its value, the network effect of all of us focusing our attention willingly, wantingly, and desiringly on that subject. Mainstream media has the right to perform as they are and be as they are, but they're actually, what we're looking at with the corporations and all of this is the Faction A versus Faction B. So my opinion at the moment is, and it seems to be spreading out from the center of empire here, is that the Faction B winning is going to bust up corporation media in a way that we've not seen in my lifetime. So I've existed in our culture here with corporation media telling me what all the thoughts should be, and it'll go away within these next few years. They actually don't want to hear the truth. They want to hear the facts and then make up their own mind as to what is true and what is not. Around here, that was the eulogy for the legacy media, is that they tried to tell us the truth. Now, my dad from Missouri, he had a saying, you can't tell people shite. Okay. Yeah. And he says you got to be careful about it because it's like teaching a pig to sing. It's entrainment technology, and they take alpha waves and piggyback them in on the carrier signals on the 1080i, and then they can put anything in there that they want, and you will accept it. Now, you won't necessarily believe it, but you'll accept it as being factual and true and so on until something forces you to confront that and ask yourself, no, wait a second, why am I thinking this? So, it's just an interesting kind of an effect. But this is why we call the situation now in the U.S. here as being woke. And so everybody says Trump is our first woke president. And, the other presidents may indeed have known everything that was going on, but they sure weren't of a mind to share it with any of us. And this is the big difference that we have here is that Faction B, I think, actually doesn't care what we know. And I actually think Faction B is of the opinion that things are so dire for humanity, we can't afford these illusions anymore, and we've got to get real serious about where we're at. Like Dane was saying, about the forests and so on not thriving, even though we've got the rains. That'll probably all change if we can get them to stop the chemtrails, but even stopping the chemtrails is going to have its own impact on us as the planet reacts to that shock. When I was a kid, the sun was yellow and mellow, as I used to think of it. I could go out and go surfing for hours, and yeah, I'd get a sunburn the first day maybe, and then, 18, 20 hours into it, I didn't even notice after that I'd ever had any impact. This is not the case anymore. We're in a white sun. It's very much harsh. It feels on the body as though 93 degrees when it's 73. Those kind of trends are likely to increase as we go forward because of the new energies that are coming around the sun and that we'll all experience. And I think we just need to face this in an awake or a woke fashion and say, yes, basically something's going on here. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I'm willing to look at it, and I don't need the blinders that someone else is trying to put on me. I would never have made the statement that within this period of time, silver was going to exceed gold in its value, because I'm very tight on that because we have so seldom get numbers. Right at the moment here in the United States, we have Dow, our Dow Industrial Average over 20,000. Silver is about $18. The last time we had this, or the very first time the number of 20,000 Dow showed up was perhaps 2002 in my data. I spoke about it in 2003 on the radio, and at that time I said silver would be about $600 an ounce. Because it showed up in our data sets that it was temporally coincident with the Dow being at 20,000. And now I got everybody thought that was quite humorous back then for a decade, and I received all kinds of abuse about it. But here we are with Dow at 20,000, and it's my contention that if it was unmanipulated, silver should be at least $600. Now I think it should probably be well over 1,000, but it should not be equal to gold. It will become so as we go into the 2020s, though. So I may have last year said that silver was going to be more valuable than gold. And they may have thought I meant within that year, but that was not the case. We've known about the 2022 crossover. In the early 2020s, assuming the data is accurate here and we're on these sets that still play out, we're going to get to the point where silver will become extremely valuable in the production of what we can think of as like anti-gravity technology. And it has to do with certain properties of silver independent of its ability to carry an electrical charge that are not replicated in other electrical metals like copper. Now, I don't know the details. I don't know why or how they're going to use it. There's just the data we have. Now, that would suggest at that point that we've passed parity, though, because basically the data is describing a situation where the manufacturers are willing to pay whatever you ask for your ounce of silver. It's immaterial because the results of using that silver would be so fantastically productive.